There is a single terrifying number that nobody in Las Vegas, Phoenix, or Los Angeles ever wants to talk about. It is the ultimate countdown capital pattern catastrophe. 895 feet. That is the exact elevation where Lake Mead hits what structural engineers chillingly refer to as dead pool, the point of absolute, irreversible systemic failure. At 895 feet, water can no longer physically flow through the massive intake towers of the Hoover Dam. The mighty Colorado River simply stops moving completely. When the water stops, the turbines fall silent. No power generating for the grid. No water flowing downstream. A sudden, catastrophic loss of life support for 25 million people. This isn't an isolated issue for a few desert towns. This threatens a massive, interconnected web of survival across 7 states, stretching from the Rocky Mountains to the ocean. If you watch the mainstream news, they will cheerfully tell you that a good winter snow season pushed the water levels up a few feet, and the crisis is easing. They want you to believe the danger has passed, that nature has corrected itself, and that the neon lights of the Vegas Strip are safe. That is a lie. Look closely at the colossal canyon walls surrounding the lake. There is a chalk-white scar etched into the rock, standing taller than a massive 10-story office building. That glaring white ring is not a natural geological formation. It is the biggest, most undeniable mark left by a human-made water crisis anywhere on the face of the earth. Despite the temporary bumps from winter storms, Lake Mead remains a staggering 140 feet below where it should be. The deficit is mathematically impossible to ignore. The media loves to frame this as an unpredictable act of nature, a severe climate anomaly that caught us off guard. But this is not just a drought story. This is fundamentally a math story. A story about a catastrophic miscalculation made by men in suits over a century ago, sealing the fate of the entire American West. And the math has been dead wrong since the very beginning. The grand foundation of the Southwest was built upon a phantom number, a banking error of epic proportions. The magnificent Hoover Dam, once hailed as the greatest engineering marvel of the modern world, isn't just drying up from a lack of rainfall in the surrounding desert. It is slowly suffocating under the crushing weight of a century-old lie. A lie that convinced millions of people that they could build water-heavy empires in a barren wasteland. We poured millions of tons of concrete, built sprawling megacities, and planted water-hungry crops in the sand, all fueled by a false promise that the river would provide forever. Now, the bill is finally coming due. Nature doesn't care about our political treaties or our desperate engineering patches. It only respects the cold, hard reality of the numbers. And as the relentless desert sun beats down, that white ring on the canyon walls keeps staring back at us, a silent reminder that time is rapidly running out. To understand how a modern marvel like the Hoover Dam arrived at the brink of death, we have to rewind the clock back to the year 1922. The scene is Santa Fe, New Mexico. A group of powerful politicians and wealthy tycoons gather in a smoky room led by the then Secretary of Commerce, Herbert Hoover. Their mission was unprecedented: to carve up the majestic Colorado River and divide its life-giving waters among 7 thirsty states. They were essentially playing God with geography. They drew arbitrary lines on maps and proudly signed the Colorado River Compact. It was hailed as a monumental political achievement, but it was actually a catastrophic mathematical crime. They made a fatal, arrogant assumption. To divide the water fairly, they first had to calculate exactly how much water naturally flowed through the raging river each year. But they based their absolute calculations on a devastatingly short window of data. They measured the river's flow during a couple of decades of unusually heavy, historic rainfall. Modern tree ring data and geological core samples have since revealed a horrifying truth. They measured the river during the absolute wettest geological epoch in over 5 centuries. Armed with this bloated, artificial data, they wrote a massive check that reality could never cash. They officially allocated 16.5 million acre-feet of water on paper. But the harsh historical reality is that the wild Colorado River naturally produces only about 12 to 13 million acre-feet in an average, long-term natural climate cycle. This wasn't just a minor rounding error. It was a staggering structural deficit of millions of acre-feet, permanently baked into the law of the land from the very first drop. For a century, the entire American Southwest has aggressively expanded upon this ghost bank account. Millions of people migrated. Towering megacities exploded rapidly from the lifeless dust. Deserts were transformed into impossibly green golf courses. Massive agricultural empires were established to grow incredibly water-intensive crops in bone-dry, unforgiving desert climates. All of this explosive, unstoppable growth was built entirely on a phantom balance that never actually existed. A statistical mirage floating over a scorching wasteland. You might wonder, how did society survive this long with such a massive annual deficit? The answer is the Hoover Dam and the massive reservoir behind it, Lake Mead. Lake Mead was never simply a recreational lake for boats. It was designed as a gigantic savings account. Every year the states overspent their water budget, the lake covered the difference. It quietly subsidized the illusion of endless abundance for decades. But you cannot run a deficit forever. The relentless math always catches up, and the debt collectors eventually arrive. Now, the savings account is effectively bankrupt. The surplus water is gone. The Southwest is staring down a massive, century-old overdraft, and there is absolutely no bailout coming from the sky. The men in 1922 didn't just allocate water, they allocated the future, and by ignoring the absolute limits of the desert, they doomed the generations that followed. To truly grasp the creeping terror of this mathematical collapse, you must stand at the very edge of the Hoover Dam and look straight down into the abyss. It is a colossal monument to human arrogance and engineering ingenuity. 5 million cubic yards of solid concrete poured directly into a hostile, unforgiving canyon. It is a massive structure so inconceivably dense that the concrete hidden deep at its core is still actively curing and cooling down. Almost a full century later, 96 men died brutally just to build this colossal wall. It was designed from birth to be the undisputed champion of the modern world, an invincible titan of industry. For decades, it stood proudly as the absolute largest hydroelectric power plant on planet Earth, effortlessly taming the wild river and illuminating the entire Western power grid. But today, this once invincible titan is being slowly brought to its knees by the relentless, invisible laws of physics, specifically, the terrifying mechanical principle of hydraulic head. The math of hydraulic head is simple but utterly unforgiving. The power generated by the dam relies entirely on the immense, crushing weight of the water pushing against the blades. As Lake Mead violently drops in elevation, that heavy downward pressure evaporates. Less weight means less physical force. Less force means the massive steel blades slowly begin to lose their spin. The official numbers are absolutely staggering. The Hoover Dam has already lost between 25 and 40% of its total power generating capacity, and the water is still dropping. To keep the colossal dam from completely shutting down, engineers have desperately rushed to install custom low-head turbines. It is a grim, last resort engineering patch. Let's be clear, this isn't a brilliant, sustainable solution. It is emergency triage. It is exactly like putting a dying patient on a mechanical ventilator to buy just a few more breaths. While the concrete behemoth suffocates, its primary dependent absolutely refuses to stop drinking. 30 miles away, the glaring neon lights of Las Vegas demand their daily tribute of water. Las Vegas, a city built on an illusion, draws a staggering 90% of its entire water supply directly from the rapidly shrinking, muddy reserves of Lake Mead. When the lake's water level catastrophically dropped below the city's original intake pipes, silent panic set in behind closed doors. They were literally inches away from sudden municipal death. So, what exactly does a multi-billion-dollar city of casinos do when they are running completely out of water? They double down. They launch a desperate, billion-dollar gamble. They initiated one of the most terrifying engineering projects in history, the third straw. A massive, $1.4 billion subterranean tunnel, violently bored deep beneath the bedrock. They drilled blindly upwards from underneath the earth, punching a violent hole directly into the very bottom of the lake bed just to suck out the deepest, final drops. It is heralded as a technological marvel, but the dark, underlying truth is impossible to ignore. Las Vegas did not solve the water crisis or fix the dying river. They didn't refill the glass. They simply spent $1.4 billion to buy a massively longer straw, desperately slurping up the muddy sludge at the bottom of the cup. It is an act of extreme existential desperation beautifully masked as an engineering triumph, a glittering mega-city stubbornly drinking the very last drops of its own lifeblood. As the massive lake recedes, shedding billions of gallons of water, it is leaving behind more than just dry rock. The dying lake is slowly returning what was hidden. The receding waterline has turned Lake Mead into a sprawling, active crime scene. The lake is literally confessing its darkest sins as it suffocates in the desert heat. Gruesome discoveries began breaching the surface of the mud. Rusted, corroded steel barrels emerged from the depths, containing the skeletal remains of victims from brutal 1970s mob hits. Decades of violent Vegas underworld history, deliberately sunk into the cold, deep abyss, are now being completely exposed to the blistering, unforgiving daylight of the climate crisis. It isn't just human remains. The dropping water levels revealed an entirely intact World War II Higgins landing craft, jutting out of the cracked earth like a metallic ghost. These haunting, surreal images serve as a macabre visual countdown, a literal and metaphorical graveyard rising from the depths, signaling the absolute collapse of the regional ecosystem. But the true horror isn't found in rusted barrels or sunken ships. The real terror is happening right now, above ground, to the people whose water simply stopped. Las Vegas had a massive war chest of $1 billion to dig deeper. But rural, generational farmers scattered across the desert do not possess that luxury. Pinal County, Arizona, has become the tragic patient zero of the water crisis. They are the absolute first victims in this collapsing domino chain of resource management. For generations, these families transformed the harsh desert into lush, profitable empires of cotton and incredibly thirsty alfalfa, completely reliant on the steady heartbeat of the Colorado River. Then, the inevitable math finally caught up. When the Tier 1 shortage was federally declared, their water supply from the river was brutally and completely severed almost overnight. Imagine waking up to find the lifeblood of your entire livelihood simply turned off. Thousands of acres of lush, productive farmland withered into dead, cracked dust in weeks. Tractors sit abandoned in sterile fields. Multi-generational family farms are facing total financial ruin, staring at empty irrigation ditches that look like open graves for the agricultural industry. They did not do anything wrong. They played by the exact rules given to them by the state, but when the ghost bank account dried up, they were sacrificed. It is dangerously easy for people in New York or Chicago to look at Arizona farmers and think this is an isolated, distant desert tragedy. They are dead wrong. Look closely at the Imperial Valley in California. It is a massive, sprawling green grid in the middle of a barren desert, sucking heavily from the dying Colorado River. This single valley is not just a local farm. It is the agricultural life support system for America, growing a staggering 2/3 of all winter vegetables for the nation. When you buy lettuce, broccoli, or carrots in the dead of winter in Ohio, Florida, or Massachusetts, that food was aggressively grown using the vanishing water of Lake Mead. The catastrophic failure of the Hoover Dam is not a regional inconvenience. It is a direct, impending threat to the fundamental food supply chain of the entire United States. When the river finally reaches its limit, those massive corporate farms will go completely dry. And when the farms go dry, the domino effect accelerates with terrifying speed. Supermarket shelves across the country will go empty. The price of basic, everyday vegetables will skyrocket violently. The desert's devastating water crisis will eventually land on your dinner plate. The Colorado River is a force of nature so powerful it carved the Grand Canyon over millions of years. It was once a roaring, unstoppable blue artery of the continent. But today, that once mighty spirit has been broken by human greed and mathematical arrogance. The great river is being bled dry before it even has a chance to finish its journey. At its end, where the Colorado should triumphantly meet the Sea of Cortez, there is no longer a river. There is only a vast, silent, and toxic graveyard of cracked mud. The water that once sustained a massive oceanic ecosystem is gone, consumed by the golf courses of Vegas, the fountains of Phoenix, and the industrial farms of California. We are now rapidly approaching a terrifying legal and existential deadline. The emergency agreements holding the 7 states together are set to officially expire in the year 2026. This is the 2026 time bomb. 7 states are currently locked in a bitter, high-stakes stalemate, desperately pointing fingers at one another while the water continues its relentless, daily retreat. Upper basin states blame the lower basin's waste. Farmers blame the growing cities. Cities blame the industrial agricultural giants. No one is willing to face the cold, hard math. They are arguing over a ghost, fighting over the scraps of a century-old lie that was signed in a smoky room in 1922. The bank account is empty, but the spending continues. The Hoover Dam itself is not in danger of collapsing. This 5 million cubic yard block of concrete was engineered to last for centuries, potentially outlasting the very civilization that built it. But a dam without water is not a miracle of engineering. It is a tombstone, a colossal, concrete monument to a society that simply refused to believe the desert was real. Today, 25 million people across the American Southwest are holding their breath, staring at the cloudless horizon and waiting for a miracle from the sky that will never come. Because the sky does not care about our treaties. The sky does not do math. It does not feel pity for our sprawling cities or our billion-dollar engineering straws. Nature only understands the absolute reality of the balance sheet, and the white ring on the canyon walls is the only auditor that matters in this dying landscape. It continues to stare back at us, inching silently and relentlessly upward, day by day, month by month, carving its message of failure into the very bones of the earth. We are running out of time. We are running out of water. But most of all, we are finally running out of lies to tell ourselves about the future of the American West. 895 feet. The number is still there, waiting in the heat. And the water is still falling.